Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who is in the middle of a dilemma. The dilemma is that of biographical criticism. I'm going to be reviewing the album Inbred by Ethel Cain, and her life is so interesting and her story is so fascinating that it is almost impossible to ignore. The fear is that by knowing those biographical facts, the facts of geography, sexuality, gender, age, all that stuff, it can cloud your opinion of the work. It can lead to sort of jumping to conclusions and taking the work of art itself and treating it as an object within context, but not as an object in and of itself. So this review is going to be in two parts. First, I'm just going to treat it as though I know nothing about Ethel Cain, a work that is going to sidestep the biographical fallacy, as it was called about 100 years ago. And then I'm going to actually talk about her biography and how it informs the music, and why it might perhaps one day lead to her superstardom. Speaking of superstars, I think the most interesting way to look at this work neutrally is to put it in sort of a continuum. Now, I talk a lot about genres in this channel. I am legitimately a French professor. It is not my job to think about musical genres, so I often come up with different terms that make sense to me, but might not be widely accepted. I'm not sure if the term emo-pop exists or to whom it refers, but I see there as being a real continuity between Taylor Swift, the often falsely opposed Lana Del Rey, and this art by Ethel Cain. I would go further even to call it American-Emo-Pop. American because the themes are quite often very American, either about rural life or class differences or these kinds of very American perspectives of life and love. I would call it emo because emotional honesty is at its core. In all three acts, I'd say all three are trying to elicit a certain amount of authenticity and connection, and then finally pop because it's enjoyable to listen to. It's pop music with good hooks. So where Taylor and Lana are often compared, and contrasted, I think it's a pretty false comparison, especially now that they work with the same producer. But often Taylor, I would say, is kind of clear in her emo pop, and then Lana is kind of smoky in her emo pop. And I think Ethel Cain is a lot more in that latter, a lot more in the Lana range. But lyrically, she actually reminds me more of Taylor Swift, which I'll get into. There is a problem with those two artists, with Lana Del Rey and Taylor Swift. That is that their fan base has aged, right? So they're singing these songs of teenage love and teenage angst, while they themselves are now into their adulthood and early middle age. So I think there will always be a space for new music that does what they are able to do. Music which makes me wish I were a sensitive teenager. I don't think I actually was that. When I was a teenager, I don't think I was as sensitive. I think I became a sensitive teenager in my 20s. I think when I was kind of shut off to my emotions as a teenager. So what do we have with this album by Ethel Cain? It's a 17-minute EP, but it feels like an hour of music. It's very rich, it's filled with emotion, it's filled with dynamics, it's filled with a true sense of the epic. I would say it is a 17-minute album that emotionally takes an hour to listen to. And I'm going to give you an example. And I really hope that I have drawn some people in by titling this, Taylor, then Lana, now Ethel, because I'm very curious, especially if I get super fans of those other groups, if they agree with what I'm coming to here. So let's take the first track off of this EP as an example of Ethel Cain's style, Michelle Pfeiffer, or as I used to call her, Michelle Pfeiffer. There's a link to it up there. The sweet and mournful sounds that dominate the entire EP are found here. It starts off with basically the Twin Peaks guitar notes, do-do. Then she starts singing the words, and she does this trick on the album. I think there's like 6 songs, and she does it like 4 of the times, where she just starts and she sings, and then drums come in, and it's awesome. It's that feeling like the words building up to the drums. Everything is easier way out west, wholly mad and half undressed. I love the way it always feels to miss you. A great example of her lyricism. I love the way it always feels to miss you. Kind of a complicated line, but when you unpack it, when you take it, word by word, kind of makes sense. It's kind of this sort of sexy, distant feeling. And then right after these words, these distorted drums come in. And goes in this really soaring mode of her saying, do you think of me too? I hate to let it go, but if I don't, then we both know I will bury us both, fed to the night as ghosts. And this is the other aspect of this music, which I imagine would be considered to be goth-y. Primarily gothy because so many of the themes are so dark and the sounds are so cavernous. It just has this very open and cavernous dark feel. But I also wouldn't really call it goth music either. This is a duet with someone named Lil Aaron. I don't know. I don't know who Lil Aaron is. He's perfectly fine. He seems like one of these sort of emo trap guys. He goes quite well with her voice. Again, very kind of, it builds nicely. The duet between them is quite nice. And then eventually some added vocals from Ethel come in that's a little bit higher. And they just end with all these just very soaring, inspirational moments, darkly inspirational. And then it ends by recapping the beginning with just those two notes. And at that point, you're sort of having a Sixth Sense moment, and you're like, oh my God, those two notes that were playing at the beginning have been playing for every goddamn bar throughout this entire song. Do-do. Even though it's gone to so many places, you arrive here again. Like I said, this album really gets you going and all over the place, and being all over the place. And it's nice because ending it with these two notes is a reminder of the simpler time when you started off listening to this song. The next track is called Crush. Same trick again with the drum beats coming in after the initial lines being sung, but it's it's not like a distorted drum, it's kind of a clean drum line, which is great. It's like a teenage love song about being attracted to a school shooter, maybe. I don't know. He's got guns in his locker. As a father of teenagers, I'm not sure I entirely agree with the messaging on here. Then once the drums come in, these very interesting lyrics. His daddy's on death row, but he'll say it with his chest though. His friends move dope. He hasn't tried coke, but he's always had a problem saying no. His older brother bagged the valedictorian. His mother steady screaming, he should be more like him. So when I'm comparing this to Taylor Swift, this is sort of an upside down Taylor Swift song. It's loving the wrong boy, but it's not loving the wrong boy in a kind of innocent way. It's like loving the wrong boy, like a lot darker, a lot of a kind of seedier, slimier feeling. This song like lusting after a real dirtbag. But it does a lot of the same things that Taylor Swift is able to do in her love songs, where there's even the kind of 50s trick of kind of like speaking what you're saying. You're like, that's not true. Like singing and speaking and mixing it all together. It does that weird, timeless thing of being modern production with some 50s and 60s sound elements. It's a great song. It really is, even though it makes me uncomfortable. A lot of this album makes me uncomfortable in a good way. God's Country is the next track. It's kind of a slow, mournful 80s style song. Whatever she's doing with the drums is always quite interesting. As far as I can tell, she's playing everything too. I don't know. I've read the credits. It seems as though no one else is doing anything, so I think she's playing all the instruments, which is cool. But kind of Phil Collins-y sort of drum machine sounding drums. A ridiculously Swiftian pre-chorus. Okay? And this got me going on another thought, which is perhaps the true founder of this emo pop, this American-Emo-Pop that I'm trying to describe, is the boss, is Bruce Springsteen. So we have these lyrics from this, young female pop emo star, whatever. But I think I could sing them like Bruce Springsteen, and you'd sort of see what I'm saying. It was a highway to nowhere, and we rode it. Cold car with no gas, and we chose it. Soft bodies playing in the street. Our kids will grow up with half as much, trying to build something out of dust. Finding out too late what they need. 2, 3, 4. This theme of the dusty road and the going out to nowhere and with the lyricism of Bruce. And that's the thing, that a lot of these lyrics, it's easy to let them to sort of just let them wash over you without paying enough attention to what's really being said. It's a beautiful line, though. Cold car with no gas. You know, that's a beautiful image. Soft bodies playing in the street. A little bit incongruous, like what exactly is being meant here. This has a guest appearance by someone called Wicca Phase Springs Eternal. I guess like random name generators are a thing. I don't know. Another kind of like bedroomy emo guy who's quite nice in here. Says a line, "Embraced the Bonnie Beast." That's a very precious line, but it actually sounds good the way that it is. And then there's these bell sounds that come in the back, and then guitar work. I talked about the drums. There's a lot of good guitar work on this album as well, and it becomes even more and more epic to this actual drum fill. So we have kind of like a Phil Collins sort of drum machine going on, and then actual drum solos and drum fills coming in, and it is a real epic goth piece. Unpunishable is the next track. Again, with this very smoky, dark voice, kind of smoky and mean. After the last song kind of built up just so much dynamics, this song itself is not quite as engaging. Down bad and nasty, sacrificial angel, dirty slut with needs. In a convocation or a room alone, call me what you want and I'll be that. Sucking on his teeth, he needs it so bad. He's screaming, party's over, go the F home. Drums. That trick again. Starting off and going to drums. Again, it seems a lot of this is trying to get at that seedy kind of gross lover. Like really trying to get there. In the chorus, she sings like really kind of bombastically. And what I predict is that this is a lot like some of those acts I've been ignoring for the last 20 years that I'm just learning about now since I started this channel 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, almost like Paramore, or sort of like these groups that appeared in the aughts and the tens who just sort of had these loud, soaring female vocals, I think that must be here. Next track is called Inbred, and this starts with enough silence that you think your phone is broken, okay? So I record the channel with the same phone that I listen to all the music on, and I was like, oh crap, is there some kind of Wi-Fi problem here? It's like 23 seconds of silence, and then the sound of wind, and it's building up to something, and the voice comes in. You never guess what's going to happen after there's a little bit of voice. The drums come in. Older brother made a name for himself with the cops. Scumbag F, but I swear that he's not. Going back into this theme of kind of older brothers, this real American theme of sort of a small town person who's looking for something dirtier and grosser than that which life has provided them. This has a nice moment where the drums cut out and it's just guitar and the voice with a heavy echo. Probably the whole album is filled with good dynamics. This probably has the best climax of the whole album with just the drummer just riding the crash cymbal. Again, I think the drummer is just her. I don't know. Does your baby know her daddy is a rapist? That's up there for the most uncomfortable line of 2021. It ends with a track called Two-Headed Mother. And this is cool because it really brings the guitar work to the front. The guitar work has been all the way throughout this album, but here it's primarily a guitar-led song. The voice comes in with a kind of languishing voice and kind of a drum machine beat that's very kind of down, and just this guitar is kind of twiddling, going all over the place. It gets matched with some kind of moaning vocals until it eventually fades out with the words, "Two-headed mother pulled you from the black, and she can send you back." I don't know what that means. Now let's switch to the other mode. Now that we've discussed this album as a very quality work of dark, emotional American pop, how does a biography change anything in here? Well, let's talk with the most kind of extra textual thing we can have, the album cover. The album cover you see here. I believe this is her 2 times, kind of like the two-headed mother that ends it, and you see with the big cross. As you can tell from my notes, this looks like a poster for an A24 horror movie, right? Like if I told you A24 was releasing a movie called Inbred, and I showed you, I said this was the poster, you'd be like, oh, that's good. Oh, that's gonna be good. Yeah, I saw a trailer for that. I think it's at Sundance. And apparently, she grew up in Florida. Her father was a deacon, and she learned how to sing in the church, and she moved from the Panhandle to live in a church in Indiana. So she lives in a church. Like that's her home. And that's like where she wrote all this music. And she had this really oppressive Baptist upbringing, which really recontextualizes the whole album with a lot of its kind of themes. And then you learn, the more you read about her, that this Ethel Cain, that's not her real name, that's an alter ego. It's an alter ego of someone whose real name is Hayden Silas Anhedonia. Going beyond that, you learn that she left the church after being ostracized for being gay, and then after being ostracized for being trans. And when you read the interviews with her, like, all of a sudden, like, all these things have come right up to the front. And it's interesting because the music is interesting enough that it doesn't need these added elements, I don't think. And she even kind of comes across as a little bit goofy, and like she's performing too hard in the interviews that I've read, with like talking about like ghosts and the kind of superficial projection of edginess and gothness. And it's funny because all those added elements, those biographical elements I'm talking about, are very engaging, obviously, right? I mean, being a trans woman growing up in a Baptist family with a father as a deacon and recording an album in a church in Indiana, all of those things make me say, wow, I bet that's a great album. That's a great persona. But the music is more interesting than her persona. But I think her persona could eventually lead to some form of stardom, like real stardom. I don't know. There's my theory. There's my thoughts. I want to thank the auditor of the show, Zach Giesaman, who suggested this album. Whenever anyone suggests anything, I always listen to it. I don't always comment on it, and I wish I could review more than I do. A couple people suggested the album by Fog Lake, and I listened to it, and I loved it. I just didn't have anything to say about it besides, it's good. So also have a listen to that as well. So it's funny because before I started doing this show, I was one of those people who said, there's no more good music anymore. Music used to be good. And now I do 3 videos a week, 3 to 5 videos a week, and I still can't get to all the good music that comes out. So anyways, keep it up, and thank you so much, and thank you for watching. So there's the camera.